where people have quite deep lying prejudices that just out of ignorance or family or media, but it's not that important to them. And then people like Farage and Trump are able to debate that. And the way that people, where that plays into conspiracy is where people can see that things aren't quite working or that there are powerful people doing corrupt things. There's a little bit of truth in most conspiracy theories because that's what makes them so compelling. People spot something that doesn't add up, and there's something that is a bit true in what they're thinking is the answer, but then they're being pointed in the direction of something that isn't actually the truth. It's a conspiracy theory. And then those conspiracy theories and the people behind them pick up a big following and they become very important to the people who follow them. And then that's where fandoms then start to grow up around the people pushing these theories, but also the theories themselves. You know, the sort of QAnon. There's people who are fans of Q. There's people who are fans of QAnon influences, and there's people who are fans of like the theories that come out of that. And obviously, a lot of the people who come off worst from all this conspiracy theories and all of this kind of thinking is usually minorities like disabled people and LGBTQ plus people and immigrants, because for these negative theories to take hold, you need somebody to blame. And it can be the powerful people, them versus us of populism, the establishment. But there's got to be somebody who corrupts those people. And it's the woke, it's the Jews, it's autistic thinking, it's trans people getting into organizations and capturing them, which is things that people are saying. But obviously it's not true, but it gives people an explanation. And people are always looking for explanations for things.
As a trans and a disabled person yourself, when you see the conspiracy theories as targeted to discriminate against trans and non-binary people, to disabled people, how do you feel? How does it affect you yourself?
I try to read less of it than I used to because I used to research it, or at least the memes and the popular posts that would go round to understand what messages people were hearing and how it was affecting them. And I try to dig less into that now because a lot of it's just the same stuff and it's just distressing. But I think one of the hardest things to deal with is that as somebody who is autistic and wants things to work properly and has quite a strong sense of justice and fairness, knowing that you can't get people out of these positions via logic and truth and research and
Yeah.
information is very difficult, that you have to just appeal to emotion and storytelling, the way that they got into the theory in the first place. They didn't come to that decision through rational thinking. They might say, do your own research or you're not being told the truth or whatever, but they didn't come to the position that they hold through entirely rational thinking. And they were at least influenced by somebody that they saw as an authority at best, if not a whole pattern of things dragging them that way. And it's very difficult to deal with it when it's somebody you know or somebody who's connected
Yeah.
to some. That's the worst side of it, because I don't really care most of the time what complete strangers think of me, unless they're campaigning for me to have fewer rights, or unless the things that they're thinking lead to more abuse on the street and things like that. What people I don't really respect think doesn't really matter. But when it's people close to you or when it's people who have the power to do something about it, that's when it gets really distressing. So knowing that there are quite powerful people in political parties and in broadcasters that genuinely believe that autistic girls are very susceptible to being told that they're trans when they're not, and they're being transitioned by malign forces, and people assume that autistic AFAB people don't have any agency, that they can't possibly be really trans, that if you're autistic, you can't possibly know anything about yourself. That gets very personally difficult for me to deal with.
It's definitely something would want to ask because it would one of the things that I wanted to get to this interview is what is like for autistic or neurodivergent disabled people and LGBTQ online and how these communities interact and exist online. What are the kind of certain groups and movements there are online of disabled people either campaigning and the impacts on the negative information on the community as a whole on this disinformation and this hate coming out online.
Yeah, I can see what you mean. It's almost like with both autism and LGBTQ plus stuff that sort of 10 years ago, maybe things looked like they were going quite well, that people's understanding of all these things was getting better, that there were more high profile people coming out as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or trans. People understood that better, and the laws were getting better in a lot of places, that were more people who understood what autism was, and not just in children. There were a lot more adults and high profile people saying, look, I'm autistic and this is how it affects me. So it felt like people's understanding of both things was going in a positive direction, and then that seemed to threaten people. And now when you hear autism mentioned, half the time it's either somebody using it as an excuse for absolutely terrible behavior, or somebody using it on their behalf to say, oh, this serial killer or this violent person was also autistic, which is not helpful. People might know what autism is now, but they have a warped idea of who it affects and how it affects you. And when it comes to trans stuff, that people just, instead of going, oh, it's a very small number of people and what they do doesn't really affect me, and they're part of the LGBTQ plus community and gay marriage is fine, all this kind of thing. Now there's more gay and lesbian people being beaten up on the streets. People are scared of trans people. Laws and inclusion strategies are going back the other way. I'm hoping that it's the darkest hours just before the dawn and that people just get sick of it and it goes back the other way. But it's like we're a scapegoat for lots of things because people always viewed autistic people as a bit less than human because of the way that we interact with the world. And same with people with ADHD, that obviously people are also saying it's too widely diagnosed, which is not true. It's just that more people understand and more people are
Yeah.
diagnosed, that we're seen as not as good at being human and are not having agency to make decisions properly, or that we should be dismissed when we have opinions on things and that other people should talk for us. And then the same with trans people, particularly young trans people. Older trans people are seen as predatory and threatening, and then young trans people are seen as like deluded and being predated upon. And it's very unpleasant, but it's also just like a wedge issue because they used to use, oh, if you let two men marry or two women marry, then you might as well marry your dad or your dog. And that doesn't work anymore. And now it's like the trans people are coming for you. They're going to mutilate your children and assault
Yeah.
your daughter in the toilets. Like they're using the edges of conditions and the tiny bit of understanding, a bit like with the conspiracy theories, the tiny bits that people know, that somebody might have social difficulties or that there's inclusion stuff to include trans people in particular spaces, and then they use that to scare people. There's always the outsider, and we just happen to be the groups at the moment alongside asylum seekers and immigrants more generally that you can do that too, because people don't know enough of us and they don't know enough about us, and so we can scare people.
What do you think has been like the thing that's really been the causation of this change of attitudes towards neurodivergent and trans and non-binary people over the past decade? And what do you see if in the future? What could be the possible thing that could change or reverse in a more positive way to
Yeah.
see more trans inclusion and more trans rights as well as that for autistic people as well?
I think the easy answer that people would say is, oh, it's social media. And social media is part of it, but actually a lot of the views and a lot of the stuff that older people are believing is actually coming from traditional media and authority figures. Just social media allows ideas to spread quicker and also allows people to find community, including marginalized people, and people find it scary. One trans person you can ignore and 5,000 networked online, or lots of autistic people saying together, we don't want to be treated this way online is much more difficult to ignore. But I think a lot of it is actually to do with the wider geopolitical sort of situation, the liberal or neoliberal, however you want to see it, world order that kind of peaked with Tony Blair and Bill Clinton and all of that kind of side of things, and to a certain extent Obama, all kind of came crashing down with the global financial crash in 2008, where people were like, oh, all of this stuff that we were building towards, and we seemed, oh, there would be broadly peace forever. This is how politics is meant to work. Everything is won from the center. We do stuff like this, and this is good for everyone, and there will be growth. And the internet is great, and capitalism is marvelous. Woohoo! We've got rid of all of the bad dictators. That whole worldview just started to collapse. It started with sort of 9/11 really, but it like the global financial crisis made it, and then
Yeah,
Brexit, and were just visible signs that things weren't working for people anymore. Once things aren't working for people anymore and things are terrible, when things are broadly fine, people don't worry about minorities that much. It flares up when people have got worries that they've they feel aren't being addressed, or things seem to be going badly for people and they don't understand why, and they look for things to blame. And then people who are those kind of populist charismatic figures who have a lot of fans like your Farages will pick up on that sentiment and be able to, exploit it. Trump used to be pro-trans, if anything, and he's friends with Caitlyn Jenner, and Jenner is like still a supporter of Trump, one of the good ones. Nigel Farage wasn't overly bothered about LGBTQ plus people. He was mostly concerned about the EU and immigration, but he saw that it was something that people were being concerned about. And then he amped it up, and Kemi Badenoch and the Tories and stuff like that. It's just like they find a thing to scapegoat. So it's more that
yeah.
everything has fallen apart and the new thing hasn't really come yet. So we're in the horrible bit where it's all kind of being delved and sorted out. But when people realize that these people who are saying it was, if we ban all of this woke stuff, everything will be fine again, when they realize that doesn't, they haven't got what they wanted from it, then it starts to go back the other way. Like we've started to see people's attitude to Brexit go back the other way, that people don't want Brexit anymore because it didn't give them what they wanted. And people like farmers are really upset that they voted for it, and it's made things worse for them in terms of trade and in terms of the subsidies they were getting and stuff like that. It hasn't delivered the benefits. And there's only so long where you can go, that's just because we're not doing Brexit properly, or we're not getting rid of anti-woke properly, or they wouldn't let me build the wall, but if you let me build the wall. So I think people have to see through these figures and get disappointed with them for something else to come, and that takes time. And it's a worldwide problem. It's not just Britain or America or Europe. It's everywhere is grappling with what do you do when everything that you used to do, even on whether it's centrism or left wing or right wing stuff, doesn't really deliver what people want. I can't hear you now. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Well, as you were saying when you were saying about Donald Trump, there was that thing where he wasn't always this authoritarian or nationalistic. But it's just that thing as well when you mentioned about Nigel Farage as well, where it's like there's some concepts and ideas they chose to politically capitalise on, and as was like referencing with Farage, he hasn't always been the same on being so anti-trans and focused on art issues. But I guess it's that thing of post-Brexit finding another problem to push through and push up the push themselves up to being a powerful figure in politics and be that sense of impact. But link this also to the thing of neurodivergent. You know, Elon Musk as well. Like he has claimed, he said before that he is autistic or has Asperger's, and they would also be able to ask, about what is the impact of people who are quite famous or popular, who maybe like who are rightly seen as being quite negative and quite polarizing figures, who that can do damage to community. But like also are autistic themselves. What has the impact been of like figures like Musk on the autistic community?
I certainly think for autistic men and people, it's been particularly negative because people's stereotype of autism was already like a loner, obsessive boy or man who creeps you out a bit, might be very talented in tech or maths. And so when you have people like Musk and his fans who absolutely love him and venerate all of this stuff, then obviously some autistic people will be drawn towards that and go, people may see this as negative, but he's really powerful and popular, so great. I'll lean into that. And obviously others are like, very distressed by it because that's not how they want to be seen. But I think it's always the problem when something becomes better known and more people are known to have this condition or be something, but not quite enough people for it to be, oh, it's a very diverse thing.
Yeah,
Like when we
because
first started the gay people and lesbians on television, there were certain stereotypes that did exist in the community. They were representative of parts of the community, but it wasn't everything. And until you had, it was a struggle enough to get any representation in the media, and then people couldn't see themselves in the representation there was, and it took time for there to be a wider range of representation so that now you don't just think, oh yeah, all gay people are like camp and make saucy jokes but are basically harmless, never really have sex and are shiny entertainers. Like that's an all lesbians are mannish and a bit of a villain like that, and always die in films and TV.
mhm,
Like we're getting more to a point with representation now that people can go, oh, literally anybody could be gay or lesbian or bisexual. But we're not there yet with neurodivergence because the media representation and then the celebrities who are who either say they're autistic or other people say that they're autistic, people around them say they're autistic. We're not quite there yet with how we're representing the diversity of the community. And if anything, with neurodivergence, we're very divergent from each other, as well as
yeah,
like neurotypical people. And that bit seems to get lost over and over again, so that you still get people going, oh, he seems a bit autistic to me, or she seems a bit autistic. And what they mean is they seem a bit off to me, and that's the badge that I know about. But obviously, autism is a spiky condition, and people, even people who or are neurodivergent, a lot still don't really know about the spectrum isn't a line. It doesn't go from a
mm,
bit autistic with some traits to a lot autistic, but that the same person can be really good at not just really good at some things and really bad at others, but also really good at some things and really bad at the same things at
yeah,
different
because
times. That you have an amazing facility for language and be a writer, podcaster, an actor, and then have times where you nothing comes out of your mouth. You
yeah,
can't communicate, and it's the same person, but we don't have that representation yet for people to understand how messy and spiky a profile like a condition is. We just go, oh, they're very intelligent and articulate, so they must be low support needs and they must not struggle with that many things apart from feeling a bit sad. Or this person struggles to communicate and then is probably very severe problems. And it doesn't really work like that, in that I've met neurodivergent people who have learning disabilities as well as autism, and they're much less tortured in a way by the and disabled in society by their neurodivergence
yeah,
because they're more visibly disabled and they have more support with that, but also they just don't ruminate on it the same. Like it doesn't, how they think about their autism is sometimes people are mean to me and it sucks. And that's obviously horrible. But like they don't sit there thinking everyone hates me all the time, or I've just made somebody really upset and I don't know why. And then you can get people who seem like they're absolutely fine because they live on their own or with a partner or with their family, and they don't need round the clock care and they can manage their own money and stuff like that. But their life is chaotic and they really struggle with their mental health. You can't just make decisions about people. Even people on the spectrum don't necessarily really get that yet. So you'll still get people going, oh, I've got Asperger's and I'm nothing like those people. I've got superpower.
I was listening, and then it's like the diversity of the spectrum, autistic spectrum, that because it's something that a lot of us can have disabilities and neurodivergent conditions
Mm,
co-occurring with being autistic, and there's lots still to understand the wide diversity of the autistic spectrum, and a lot of it can be defined by a lot of us having widely different lived experiences and all different lives, as you was really hinting at there. And
mm,
it's and I think that's a thing that a lot of people don't understand, because they still have figures. I was seeing something online this morning about Boris Johnson described himself as just a bit spectrumy, and so he's still got so many people within society, prominent figures, were still latching on to this Gatsby supremacy idea and this kind of dated notion of what.
It was interesting to see like the discussion and comments around that. I only looked on Blue Sky because I'm trying to keep off X/Twitter at the moment for like my mental health. It's quite a nasty place at the moment. But I noticed that quite a lot of people were going, oh, it's just another awful man who says he's got autism or he might be on the spectrum, or nobody who's really autistic says they're on the spectrum. And obviously some people do. But it's like, hang on a minute. He is clearly the most ADHD prime minister we've ever had. In that every time somebody would say to him something to him, he'd go off on tangents. You could literally see he does
Yeah,
clearly have. I'm not somebody to diagnose really people from a distance, but I can certainly see commonalities between how he reacts to things and how he organized himself that with my experience and experiences of other people who were neurodivergent. So people are very quick to go, we're not like that. And it's no, you're not like that because he's not a very nice person and you don't like the way he goes about things. And actually unpicking the bits that personality and the bits that are conditions and then the bits that are how you handle the condition is a lot more complicated than people think. So obviously we moved away from person first language, which mostly parents and some late diagnosed people have liked, saying a person with autism, because you don't say a person with femaleness, you say
yeah,
a woman, because it's indivisible from who you are. But that doesn't mean you get to be an asshole and go, because I'm autistic,
yeah,
either, because there are things that are more difficult, but being aware of those things means that you're able to take steps to mitigate that, even if it's just telling other people, oh, if I do that thing where I'm just going off on one because this is a special interest for me and I just want to bludgeon everyone to death with how much I know about this thing and it's not very helpful in this particular context where we're trying to sort something out, just say, hang on, you're giving us a lecture again, and
yeah,
I'll step back. But if you never take any of that kind of responsibility for yourself and those measures, then people don't understand either what's autism, what's personality, and what's being a dick. It's messy. You can't take my
yeah.
autism out of me. You can't take my ADHD out of me. There isn't another version of Phoenix that exists where you can sand those bits off. But equally, the way I handle my conditions after years of diagnosis and experience and reading research and dealing with people and being in the world and trying not to be a horrible person because that tortures me. Upsetting people is one of the things that I really don't like to do. I'm not conflict avoidant, but I don't want to upset people that I actually like. I
Yeah.
don't care about conflict with people I don't respect, but I don't want to cause trouble for people I do. And that sort of thing takes time and it takes work. And it's crap that disabled people have to do so much extra work rather than non-autistic people thinking, hey, maybe I need to say to this person that they've upset me or that's gone too far before it gets to the point where I explode and I'm very angry with. They need
And
to meet
if,
us halfway, but we're not quite there yet. But maybe
yeah,
we'll get with time.
yeah, because it's something that, yeah, I do get the sense that we're not quite there yet. Because it's just, I think the not annoyance and the anger come from people about, when they say, when Boris Johnson said that, I think it's more because it came out in a lazy leaving or just saying, oh, I think I'm a bit spectrum and just linking it just to some random, like, autistic stereotype without actually giving a proper serious answer in a very much in the Boris Johnson
Yeah,
way.
it was very flippant and
Yeah,
probably has some truth to it, but because he's Boris
yeah,
Johnson, he's not going to give a considered answer where he goes,
yeah,
so I think I might be on the spectrum because I'm not very good at understanding other people. He doesn't then do a whole
yeah,
paragraph about understanding people. He'll tangent off then about Peppa Pig or something, and
yeah,
it never really gets deeper than that. And it's a shame because he's so well known and everything he says gets reported that actually if he did do some of that work, it could be quite useful for people for understanding what's going on. But sadly, he won't. And
yeah,
sadly, the sort of think pieces that are written as a result of him saying that will be people going, you can't just say you're a bit on the spectrum, or people saying he's not autistic because he's not diagnosed, and not really dealing with the wider issue of going, why does he think he's on the spectrum? Why does he think he can't really understand other people. How do you get to be a prime minister while not really understanding people? In a way, that's interesting for both people who are autistic and people who aren't autistic. That what did he use to get past that while he was a successful politician is probably something everybody can learn from. Was it other people enabling him? In which case, can we have more of that in society? Is it just the fact that he's very charming? I mean, I don't like him, but he's clearly
Yeah, got that
has that
charisma.
will feel good about themselves that when he's not being stroppy. There's so much we could learn from people like that, but it's just never explored on that deeper level. It's
Yeah,
just stuck at the stereotype level, and the same with the Greg Wallace thing, that it's just, oh, here's a man who has an autistic son who is diagnosed. So it's very good, very high chance that he probably is autistic
yeah,
and that his special interests are around food and stuff like that. But it's not why he's a dickhead. Like, it's
yeah,
not sexually harassing women. It's not why he walks around with a sock on his penis and nothing else. It didn't cause
yeah.
that. It might cause him to think it's a good idea. Somebody who's a decent human being would have conversations with their friends and go, "Oh no."
Yeah,
Yeah,
and all because I think sometimes, obviously, Greg Wallace, not commenting on whether he is or isn't autistic or whatever, but he definitely has the ability to be able to keep people's disgust and, like, at least ask yourself what's making people so disgusted. Actually taking a step back and actually analysing things for yourself, because, as you said, sometimes as an autistic person, you don't always understand these things, but it's like a part of being a good person or not.
that's it. You might make the mistake in the moment, but
Yeah,
to not make the same mistake, you reflect later on how people
yeah,
reacted to that, and you do the steps, the steps of
yeah,
reflection. Classically reflective practices, like what, as in what happened, now what does it mean, what effect has it had on me and other people, and so what you're going to change as a result. And if you never think critically, I don't mean beating yourself up, because a lot of us who are neurodivergent have spent too much time thinking, oh, I must be a terrible broken person, and not that, but more try to deal with the pattern and go, okay, when I make these jokes at work, it's different from when I make these jokes in my house or in the pub. Okay, people don't react well when I do them at work. Maybe I shouldn't do them at work. It's the sort of thought process a decent person would have. And sometimes with celebrities, if you're already not a decent person when you become famous and you don't have that kind of critical thinking, then becoming famous discourages that, because you've got so many people around you who just tell you're great or quietly make
yeah,
things go away. That's one of the problems, not so much the BBC, because he wasn't employed by the BBC, but the production companies around. They obviously had reports of stuff happening, but nobody had properly taken him to one side to deal with it. They just made people sign NDAs or told people that they would deal with it and didn't. They just tried to make the messy bit go away rather than go, there's a pattern here. Greg keeps doing this. Maybe we should stop Greg keep doing this rather than moving the furniture around him so he can keep doing the thing and make programs that people like. It's not about cancelling somebody. In fact, if they'd spoke to him 15 years ago, it wouldn't ever have got to the point where he's now probably going to end up on GB News and be persona non grata for at least a decade on UK telly. It didn't have to get to this point, and your everyday non-celebrity neurodivergent people and people with mental health conditions and so on, they've seen this happen in their lives. They've seen where we've lost friends or had big rows with family members or people at work because people have let it build up and get to a point where then you not
yeah.
effectively get cancelled by that friend because they didn't say at a point where you could have done something about it, that the thing that you were saying or doing upset them.
Yeah, because it's basically about how behaviour is enabled and greenlighted, and because if you're really given and are enabled, and it's, as you said, of like Boris Johnson in a way, like people that, like, if he is neurodivergent, if those traits there, it's a fact of the system. Maybe like either they've just accepted it without actually recognizing potential neurodivergent traits, or actually digging a bit deeper and actually like trying to find excuses for negative behavior as well.
Yeah. And ideally, we want to get to a point where society accepts that people are divergent in all kinds of ways and there isn't a normal way to be, as long as you're not going around upsetting people all the time, but that you can be weird or say things that are absurd, or you can react to people in different ways, or you can have loads of wild ideas very quickly, or you can have hyperfocus, and that those can be positive things sometimes and negative things other times. But also that we just assume less of other people. Like one of the people who exploded in my face and then cancelled me as a friend, if you like, said, "Oh, I've been talking about you to other people, and we agreed that sometimes you clearly do know what you're doing and do know what you're saying, and other times you don't. So it's obviously like performative, and you're just pretending not to understand, or you're just not being sensitive to the signals that we're giving you. You're just choosing this and then using autism as an excuse." And I'm like, no, I just don't pick up on hints that often. And so you're going to have to say the thing, and it's not rude to say the thing. But how
Yeah,
society is at the moment is that we'd rather avoid conflict by not saying something to somebody early on any level, not just because of neurodivergent stuff or like outright rudeness, but if you don't tell somebody the first time they buy you, I don't know, a scented candle, that you don't like scented candles, and you go, you're trying to be really polite, and you go, "Ooh, I really love that," then they'll buy you a scented candle every year till the end of time. Like the fear of not being of being rude or having a conflict means that you end up having a much bigger conflict down the line. And that's
yeah,
not about neurodivergent via neurotypical. It's just like how our society and culture has grown up, that you don't say anything or you pretend everything's okay. And if we were much better at dealing with the little bit of conflict the first one or two times that happens with everyone, whether they're neurodivergent or neurotypical, and not just assuming that they know what we mean when we're saying
yeah,
the polite bit, and we're nice to people about it. We do the thing where we call people in rather than call people out. We go, "Oh, hey, did you know that when you say that, that kind of can be read by people the wrong way, or did you know that when you do that, upset our friend over there," without kind of being making that person feel bad, then you have far fewer actual big fallings out. It seems to me that a lot of the neurotypical people who run society or kind of create that culture or enforce that culture in the media and government, families and whatever, are the ones who are really bad at communication, what the autistic people, because they're assuming all of these little rules always hold true, and that being polite is always the best thing, as opposed to like dealing with things when they're first a problem, which is much better healthy. Like in relationships, when you go to therapy
yeah.
for relationships
I
or
really
whatever,
do, yeah,
told
to
that
agree with that.
communication and
Yeah.
transparency and all that is the best thing to do.
And really in this interview, really when they get in the point of, somebody who's looked at the concept of fandoms in politics and in the mainstream political
Mm.
culture, what do you, have you observed any sort of in the neurodivergent or disabled communities and around, as well as within the trans and non-binary LGBTQ communities? And what do you think the fandoms are as communities?
The classic one that's always brought up around LGBTQ plus people, particularly trans people, is anime and manga, and quite often Japanese culture, what they call otaku, which is like the fandom culture around those things. And I think because it's niche and fantastical and allows you to create new identities and see different types of relationships, means that it appeals to a lot of people who are outside the mainstream. And a lot of the kind of fan creators in those spaces are trans, even if they don't know it when they first start creating. And there's a lot, obviously, there's a lot of crossover between trans people and neurodivergent. And in every fandom, you will find lots of neurodivergent people. And quite often, a lot of the people running fan groups or networks or what they call BNFs, big name fans within a space, will be neurodivergent, because they're people who have developed a hyperfixation on the thing, and therefore they're the more committed to that thing and enjoy running the network. It gives them a role, it gives them a sense of purpose, and it helps you find community. And one of the things I say in the book is part of why fandoms are so big now, just like for everyone, is because we used to have all of these institutions that you'd meet people through and find community through: work, trades unions, church and religious groups, sport groups. And those don't exist on the same level now. If you work somewhere, you're probably not going to work there for 20, 30 years anymore. You're probably going to move about. You probably commute for work. You probably don't know all of your neighbors because you don't necessarily buy a house and live there for 40 years with your
Yeah.
family. Your doctor's surgery, your doctor will change all the time. You don't have the same family doctor for years. Like all of the things that used to hold stuff together are much more in flux now. So in order to find your people, unless you happen to be very lucky and meet them all at school and or college and university or in your first job and then kept all of those friends, in order to meet people that you share values with and that you can do activities with and share your feelings with, quite often it's going to be through some sort of interest group. And that leads you automatically towards fandom if you get very into a thing, because for people who are into sport, they will find their people through going to football matches in person or at the pub, or they'll find their people through playing their sport or going climbing and bouldering. And for people who are very into Marvel, they're going to find other people who are very into Marvel, whether that's in person conventions and stuff like that, and I think neurodivergent people and minorities generally were earlier to this. And that's why we're often quite well established in older fandoms and fandom groups, because we've always had to work harder to find people like us, to find community. It was always less likely that we would find people in our direct area that understanding and accepting of us, as well as sharing interests and values with us. So we were earlier to finding meetup groups in person, even before the internet for staff. We were writing fanzines and spreading them via post early doors. We were quite involved in a lot of those groups and scenes early on. And it's like everyone else has joined us in those spaces. Even with something like Blue Sky as a platform, trans people built Blue Sky. They didn't literally build the technical side of the platform, but in terms of building a user base and building some of the cultural norms that have until at least until now existed on the platform, and the way that nuclear blocking and stuff like that exists to keep people safe, and community labeling and things like that, that all came from trans people and our exclusion from other platforms and the way we're being harassed there, and then using our experiences to inform how we set up somewhere else. So it wasn't just like Twitter but without the Nazis, but it also had these cultural differences because it was set up to protect minorities. Now that loads of other people have arrived,
Yeah.
then we'll change. But that's where trans and neurodivergent people have always been at the forefront of these kind of new platforms, because we're always the people who are the first to be pushed out of the existing spaces or not made to feel welcome. If you're a neurodivergent person at school, you might have one or two other friends typically who really get you, and there may be a wider group who get you on a lesser level, but you probably don't have a big friendship group and solid network, because it's harder to find those people who are accepting of you in a kind of mainstream environment. But you probably did have other people who lived further away, that you might have met on holiday or met
Yeah.
online, or who used to go to your school that you stayed in contact with, because you hold on to those people when you find them.
And because with fandoms really and our fan culture, which integrates with the idea of special interests, focus interests, and hyperfixations for neurodivergent people. Because sometimes with small talk and like conversations can be quite difficult thing for neurodivergent
Yeah,
people. So it's just providing that kind of safe space where you can have something to dialogue.
framework, because you're able to
Yeah,
share information with other people or share your emotions about something, and the other people share your hyperfixation, so they welcome that, as opposed to listening politely and then waiting to say something else. You don't have to talk about the weather or pretend to be interested in some film you've never seen, because you can just be excited together about the thing you enjoy. And there's often roles within fandoms also make it easier for people, because those things have clear rules. If you're known as the person who makes all the fan cams, or you're known as the person who has the spreadsheet of all the songs, all the secret songs that Taylor Swift has played, that gives you both status and a role in the community, and a clear sense of what your value is and what you're known for. And that can be very comforting to a lot of neurodivergent people who are like, I don't know what I'm meant to do here. Like, it's all too open, choice paralysis. I don't know why people would care about me. If you have something that you can offer, like fandom groups will often devour that. Oh, you're the person who manages to rip every new appearance of this thing on screen and subtitle it. That's incredible. No?
And what, like, how do you think, like, is there any part of, like, fandoms for neurodivergent disabled crossover into disability or neurodivergent rights and transgender non-binary rights issues?
Absolute accessibility around events and on platforms with things like alt text, people pushing for that. And it's nice that's a norm on Blue Sky and that people will always push for people to do it. Convention spaces have often been organized by disabled people, so there's been some crossover for fandom because people want to be included. Like they know they're not included when they go to some big mainstream event, but if they want to go to the niche thing for their niche interests, they damn want to make sure that they're included there. So they've always been activists in those spaces pushing for there to be quiet rooms, pushing for there to be lots of information for the neurodivergent people who want lots of information as opposed to those who don't, making sure that there's gender neutral toilets, making sure that people don't assume pronouns, making sure that there's specifically inclusive language. Codes of conduct have often always come from marginalized groups. People might put one in to look good, but then the people who are actually affected by it will push back and reshape those codes of conduct at those big events and those fandom spaces until they work. And then some of those conventions from fandom spaces come back and get absorbed in mainstream events because people then will apply for jobs in political organizing or general events organization. And those people learnt their chops in very queer, very disabled friendly spaces will bring that into political events and mainstream corporate hospitality events because they're like, oh my God, how can you not have a ramp up to the stage for these awards? Oh my God, how can you even think about organizing this event somewhere that doesn't have step-free access? How can you even consider having this event without telling people where they can go to escape from all of the noise if they get overwhelmed, or telling people what they need to do to get a pass out to be able to come back in? So all of these things feed into each other over time as people grow up within these spaces. They might have been 15 when they first started being involved in stuff in a fandom space, and then by the time they're 27 they're somebody who's
Yeah.
running stuff outside of that, and they've brought all of that knowledge and diversity with them and their understanding of audiences and how people will, certainly for fandom things, people will flock towards stuff if it's made accessible to them, even if it's not a fandom that they super
Yeah,
care about. They're just
and I
like,
think
I
it's
will go because they've made an effort to
yeah,
include me.
and I think it's the way of how, in terms of trans non-binary rights and disabled and neurodivergent rights, of how it start to seed that into the mainstream populations, of how make that something a bit more of a wider conversation. And on the last two closing points, because no, we're gonna have to
Yeah.
wrap up in a few. What do you hope to see changing soon for neurodivergent and queer people soon for the
What I hope is that we stop policing each other all the time because ACAB, and ACAB includes queer cops and disability cops, going, well, oh, this person doesn't really have a diagnosis, or that person can't really be trans if they've done or said a bad thing, or I don't. People being annoying on the internet, sorry, isn't the same as people committing a crime. As communities get bigger, they get more diverse, and you might not agree with. So if we stop being cops to each other and push more against the people who are actually causing us problem, which isn't people within the community, it's people outside of it who need to understand us better. And I think generally just to move towards more positive and open communication for everyone solves a lot of problems. I used to do accessibility consulting for people who were like, say, refurbing buildings and designing event spaces and stuff like that. And one of the things I would tell them off for on their information is saying this venue or this event is fully accessible, because anybody who actually knows lots of disabled people knows that even within one disability, one person's accessibility needs will clash with
Yeah.
somebody else. You can't say something's fully accessible. What you
Yeah.
can say is what you have. And that again comes down to
Yeah.
communication. But if you say, we do have a quiet room, the door is this wide, so you can get in with
A bit more
mobility
detailed.
devices, but we won't say it will definitely do
Yeah.
every wheelchair because we don't know, there might be a wider one. But this
Yeah. A
is
bit more
what we do
realistic with the
have.
information.
Yeah, be really realistic and provide the information in a way, in lots of different ways, so people can access it. And then that lets people make their own decisions. You try to include as many people as you can, but what you don't say is, oh, it's fully accessible, or this is autism friendly, because the joke I used to make with one of my friends who later got diagnosed as autistic and has actually worked with cinemas is that most autism friendly slash relaxed performances of theatrical events and cinema screenings are not do not work everyone who is autistic. So
Yeah.
like my idea of hell is the lights being a bit up higher and people being allowed to run around the cinema or theater
Yes.
and eat snacks noisily and shriek, right? But for some
Yeah.
people that absolutely is what they need to be able to access the cinema. And so my friend who later got diagnosed with autism agreed with me on this, and then she's more recently collaborated with local cinemas to do adult autistic screenings for people who want people to stick to the rules.
Yeah. A
But she
bit more
communicates
quiet.
clearly
Yeah.
that's what it is. But she says the volume is not quite as high because a lot of autistic people don't struggle with the volume in cinema. But
Yeah.
other than that, people are not allowed noisy snacks. They can't chat. They can't put their feet on the seat. They can't have their phones on. Like, and that makes it a really lovely, non-stressful cinematic experience for her, but she's not trying to exclude the people who want the other
With
stuff.
autism being a spectrum, you do have the polar opposites of like sensory needs and because you've got sensory seeking and sensory avoidance. So two totally different environment preferences. Tell people where they can buy your book or use social
So
media.
everyone should buy my book because it's not very expensive. It's a lovely bright pink paperback and it has jokes in it, I promise. It's called I Heart Politics. You can get it from all bookshops online, not necessarily all of them in person, some of them in person. But if you have a favorite independent bookshop, definitely go in and ask them to order it because then they know that there's demand for it. It really matters to authors who aren't really famous that you ask for it in bookshops and don't just, if you are capable of doing this, if
Yeah.
you ask in independent bookshops rather than just buying it online, because it's not about the amount of money I make from it or anybody else does. It's about showing that people want it. And when people have done this before, then the bookshops have sometimes bought several copies in and put them on display. And then I've sold more copies, but also more people have been aware of the book. So it's a really nice thing to be able to do. And online, my website is that.phoenix.com. It doesn't have loads of stuff there, but it does have links to other stuff at the moment because I rebuilt it. And my Blue Sky is also that.phoenix.com because I did the verification thing. Neurodivergence is diverse, so let's just actually celebrate that for once and enjoy it.